About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
Welcome to Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, and through this series of programs, I'm explaining some of the ideas and experiments and introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, just to remind you, our culture generally has two ways of thinking about consciousness. In the world of medicine and psychology, consciousness is being aware and awake, knowing what's going on around us. In the field of noetics, as it's emerged over the past 100 years, though, consciousness is much more. It's the processes and products of mind, both in our awareness and outside of it. It's profound human experience. And ultimately, consciousness looks like what connects us all. So far in this series, we've looked at a number of models of what consciousness is, starting with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung's ideas from the early 20th century, then into the mid-century with Charles Tart's 1960s work on the states of consciousness and Julian Jaynes, who related consciousness to the separation of right and left hemispheres of our brain, and some of the field models of the mind that have been developed by Rupert Sheldrake, Kurt Lewin, and others. And then we began to consider how quantum mechanics relates to consciousness with the work of David Bohm, Dana Zohar, and Amit Goswami. We also looked at the global brain, or noosphere, as described by Peter Russell, Teilhard de Chardin, and Ervin Laszlo. And then last week we explored the field of transpersonal psychology, which was founded in the 1970s to apply some of these new understandings in therapy and in research. You can catch up on those past shows on the KXCR.net archives. Click on that little cloud up on the banner at the top of the screen to find them. And on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, books, and authors that I use or mention on the show. Today, we return to the hard sciences of chemistry and biology to look at the ways mind and body are related. I'm going to start with Candace Pert, a neurobiologist at the National Institutes of Health who has received several awards for the work she describes in her book, Molecules of Emotion. Now, most folks who pay attention to their health are familiar with the words melatonin, serotonin, dopamine, and others. These are names of some of the chemicals that the cells in the brain put together from the foods we eat, which travel through the bloodstream to other cells in various organs and tissues where they direct the activities of those cells. We experience this process as changes in mood, becoming more happy, relaxed, excited, or peaceful, depending on which chemicals are being released into the bloodstream. What Candace Pert and her team were able to do was to show what these chemicals do, how they work, and how our thoughts, as well as the nutrients we take into the body, affect this process. Some of you may have heard that people who meditate have increased levels of some of these chemicals in their system, or that laughing, exercising, or being angry can affect those levels as well. So in a very real way, these chemicals, also called hormones or neuropeptides, are a direct link between what our mind is doing, what state of consciousness we're in, and what our body is experiencing. She's explained it many times in many places, but here she is in an interview with Bill Moyers in his documentary film Healing and the Mind from the 1990s.
Peptides are strings of amino acids strung together very much like pearls strung along in a necklace. And a neuropeptide is a peptide that was first found in the brain, but then later on we found that they were everywhere, and that these molecules are being released from one place, they're diffusing, they're binding, and they're tickling these receptors that are on the surface of cells. Every cell in your body is encrusted with receptors of various types.
Like a satellite dish that's receiving a signal.
Facing outward like a satellite dish and receiving, putting out their little antenna and receiving what's coming in. Everything in your body as it's running is being run by these messenger molecules.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the cells have to talk to each other, otherwise the whole organism can't hang together. And the cells have to talk. Now, I guess you're going to ask me what they talk about.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what do they talk about?
It might just be make a little more of this protein, or make a little less of that protein, or these cells stop dividing because we've got to put our energy into digestion. In a way, one way to think of the neuropeptides as we've come to think of them as directing where the body should pay attention, where the body should put its energy. Lay down and relax so you can digest your food, man, or you're going to die. That kind of message. But of course, on a cellular level.
Clearly, she's telling us that our mind, our consciousness, is not just in our brains, but is working in and through the whole body, through the presence and interactions of these neuropeptides. Now, you may have noticed that Pert referred to receptors, little antennas on each cell that receive the messages of these neuropeptides. How these receptors work has been the study of a lot of other scientists, but most visibly former Stanford University Medical School professor Bruce Lipton. I'll let him tell you how he came to understand it, that those receptors, not the genes, drive the behavior of a cell.
I became a biologist, a developmental cellular biologist. I'm working on cells, of course, and in my graduate work I was cloning stem cells. And it's interesting because a lot of people think stem cells are something brand new that just came into this world recently, and the fact was I was cloning stem cells back in 1967, 40 years ago. And the significance was, while I was doing this research, I was also teaching medical students. So I was teaching medical students the foundation of how cells work, the conventional story out of the textbook, genes control life, what we call the genetic determinism, the belief that genes control your traits, behavior, your physical characteristics, etc. And what my research revealed when I was studying the stem cells was this, very profound. I put one stem cell in a petri dish all by itself, and it would divide every 10 to 12 hours. So it'd be 2, 4, 8, 16 cells, 32 cells. After about 2 weeks, I have thousands of cells in the petri dish, but what was unique? They were all genetically identical. But then I did the experiment. The experiment was to take some cells out of the dish and put them into a separate dish with a different environment.
Okay.
And so the environment is the culture medium, but the culture medium to cells is like the world that we live in. It's got the air, the water, the food, all the things in it. So I take the cells out of my stem cell dish, put them in a separate dish with a different environment, and the cells form muscle. But then I went back to the same dish with genetically identical cells in it and took some cells out and put them in a different environment, and they form bone. And then I went back to the same dish with genetically identical cells and put them in a third petri dish with a different environment, and they formed fat cells. And there I was confronted with this reality. All the cells are genetically identical, but they had different fate, fat, muscle, bone. And I said, simple question, what controls the fate of cells? And the answer is the environment. It was the only thing that was different because they were all genetically identical.
So for Lipton, what environment we are creating for those cells is the key. He helps us understand that more clearly.
As the single cell evolved to be the most intelligent it could be, it ran into a physical limitation because intelligence is physically tied up with the membrane or skin of the cell. You can only have so much membrane. So evolution apparently stopped. It was like 2.5 billion years, just a single-cell organism. Then it said, well, how can you have more evolution? The answer is cells decided to come together in community, because when cells come into community, they share awareness. So there's more awareness with 10 cells than there is with one cell. And there's more awareness with 1 million or 1 billion or 1 trillion. So when you look at a human being, while we see ourselves as single entities, the truth is we are made out of 50 trillion amoeba-like cells. And so our body is this giant community. And what makes it very exciting, as you mentioned, is, well, in my own work with cloning cells, I can take a cell out of your body and it could live outside of you. Why? It has its own intelligence. It has essentially every function in your body is present in a cell. So my 7-year-old vision manifests to be true when I got older, to realize cells are miniature people. And then you say, well, what about happens in the human body? And I go, this is where the issue comes in, is because you have 50 trillion cells living in community, but your mind is the government. When a government works in harmony with the people, then the people thrive and the community is in good health and grows. But when a government is not really supportive or not working in harmony with a community, then the government can cause the nature of that community to fall apart, or even lead to the end of the community. Well, that's what we're finding out. Our mind is the government. And when we entertain harmony and the right living and balance with nature and with each other, then we provide our 50 trillion cells with very life-supporting information and chemistry.
So Lipton is telling us that what's going on in the mind is as important to every cell as what is going on in the body. And in his book, The Biology of Belief, he provides the details of how the whole system of mind, thoughts, emotions, and subconscious programming work together to drive the activity of the cells and so the life of the body. The membrane of the cell, he tells us, is covered with specific chemicals that only certain other chemicals can bond with. The chemicals on the membrane are called receptors, and there are millions of them. There may be as many as 50,000 receptors for a single chemical on any one cell's membrane or wall. These receptors either change shape when the right chemical meets up with them, or literally open up and let that chemical into the cell. And this is how those spike proteins on the COVID virus work, by the way. Once the connection has been made, the different parts of the cell start combining and recombining with the new chemical until some other chemical attaches to the receptor to change the instructions again. Usually the cell is receiving nutrients that help it function, but it also receives those neuropeptides that Dr. Pert described and other hormones which cause it to change how it's functioning. And since most of those neuropeptides are generated by brain cells based on the thoughts and feelings we're having, consciousness, therefore, can no longer be seen as isolated from our physical experience. In fact, they are one and the same. The activities of mind drive the activities of the body, which then affect the mind, which then affect the body, in this mutually reinforcing feedback loop that is what we call life. So this physical set of interactions, these cells, these chemicals moving back and forth between cells and directing cell activity, is the biology and the chemistry. But if we look at another level, we can look at the physics of what's going on here, and we can talk about how the chemical bonds in these interactions are actually the exchange of electrons, the connection between the atomic structures of the molecules that are these chemicals. And so as electrons shift back and forth, they are generating electromagnetic fields. And it is the charges between these chemicals that are actually connecting and not connecting, right? So if you have a positive and negative charge, they match. If you have two negatives, they push away, etc. And in the chemicals that we're talking about, they have charge structures, if you will, electrical structures as well as chemical structures. And those electrical structures generate fields. And if we get down to the level of the quantum that we've been talking about in other programs, we can see that what is happening in every interaction between the neuropeptides and the cells in the body is a quantum mechanical process by which a harmonious set of interactions unfolds. And fields are generated, and guess what? Fields can change those interactions. So in later work, Bruce Lipton and then much later, other people like Joe Dispenza began to help us to see how the electromagnetic fields involved in the exchange of the chemicals could be replicated by electromagnetic fields around us. Now, clearly, the work of electricity affecting the body has been around for as long as all these other things we've been talking about. But now we begin to understand it. And now we begin to realize that below the electromagnetic field, the quantum field has a specific signature. And when that signature is sustained and supported and maintained, then the system as a whole is doing well, is functioning well. And that's what we're aiming for when we talk about well-being or health, is for the whole being to be in that state of harmonious interaction and mutual support for the well-being of the whole. Which brings me to the book review portion of the program. And today we're going to look at a book that first came out as a movie. And that movie is What the Bleep Do We Know? It was filmed in Portland, Oregon in 2003 and released in 2004 while I was teaching a class on the new sciences. And so I took my whole class down to the Baghdad Theater on Southeast 39th Street, which is the theater they show in the movie. And we saw it, and we were so glad we did. It uses state-of-the-art graphics to illustrate many of the concepts we've explored on this program, including the quantum nature of the universe and of consciousness, and the subject of today's program, the integration of body and mind through the neuropeptides. The book version of What the Bleep Do We Know, written by Mark Vicente, does a pretty good job of taking the reader through the concepts, and it's a useful adjunct to the film. There's also a 3D video package, What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole, which came out in 2006. And it's actually 3 different angles on the story, one from the biology, one from the physics, and one based on consciousness. It includes later interviews with some of the speakers that were in the first video and deeper explorations of the material in the original film. So, if reading isn't your thing, and you find visual images helpful in understanding, I heartily recommend that you find What the Bleep Do We Know, or the expanded DVD version, What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole, and spend, lots of hours with it. I've enjoyed every minute that I have spent with it. That sound tells me it's time to address some of your questions and or a news item. And today I want to address something that Bruce Lipton mentioned and that some of you have asked me about. And that is, how is it that we can shift the mind in such a way that we do create a positive, harmonious environment for those cells to function? Some of you will know that, of course, I'm going to mention what is called meditation. But I'm not talking about sitting with your legs crossed and your back straight and going into a state of consciousness in which there is no thought whatsoever. That's a way to accomplish what he's talking about, but it isn't the only way. There's been a number of studies done that point out that simply to sit quietly in reverie, contemplating the life around us, trees, birds, rivers, skies, sunset, ocean waves. Simply sitting there, being aware of all of that, is every bit as helpful and healthful for the cells of our body as any other form of meditation. And it turns out that prior to the 1970s, the average middle-class American might spend as much as an hour or more a day simply sitting in reverie. I don't imagine very many people today can say that unless they're retired or unless they have a young one around who they need to keep an eye on, but they don't have to do anything for in this moment. So what else can we do? We can go into an hour or so of reverie. We can read or listen to satisfying, pleasant music and books. We can watch movies that are joy-filled and loving. I think that's part of the reason people like the Christmas season on Hallmark so much. There's so little upsetting drama and so much joy. We can also do something loving for ourselves or for someone else. This, too, will help to generate the neuropeptides that will tell the cells of our body that all is well and they can function at their peak. Doing something wonderful for ourselves and for others. That can be a wonderful bath or shower. It can be wrapping up in something really comfy and warm. It can be going for a walk in nature. It can be any number of things like that for ourselves that do not require being actively engaged in anything, but allow us to simply enjoy and delight in this experience. And doing something for others also will want to be in that gentle frame rather than being actively and determinedly going to fix something. All right? So let's say that you're aware that someone is hungry or that someone likes your particular soup or you see someone who is asking for help. If you do that from that frame of, oh yeah, I can do that, that would be fun, you are actually releasing those positive neuropeptides that will restore the body to functioning. That's a lot different from doing it because you ought to, or it's an obligation, or, oh my goodness, do I have to? None of that is good for the body. So what I'm suggesting, and perhaps you've already heard it, is what we do out of a sense of tension or must or have to or gotta is gonna get in our way. But what we can do because it is joyful and enjoyable will energize us. And especially if what we can do is something that we do well and easily, that it takes no effort to start to do, that it's perhaps an expression of one of our natural gifts. Those times are the times that the body, the cells in the body, can be replenished and restored into the state that allows them to function at their fullest and fight off anything that needs to be fought off and move forward in a healthy, strong, active way. So yes, there are easy ways, effortless ways, enjoyable ways, and in fact, those are the ways to have the body and the mind be in harmony and the cells to know and do exactly what it is that they need to do for our well-being. Go ahead and meditate if it serves you, but try some of these other things as well. You may find that you are far happier and healthier than you have ever been in your life, as many people have found before you. Well, that has brought us to the end of our session today. I hope that you've found something useful in it. The next time we get together, we will look at some of the experiments that have been going on at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Petaluma, California, that help us to see how all the things we've talked about so far work. We're out of time for today. But remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources that we refer to on each show, along with archived past shows, and where you can always send me comments, questions, concerns, things you'd like me to address, and I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 FM in beautiful Florence, Oregon, where it's springtime. And I hope you have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.